You're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
Second down, or three. Paul Blair, 250 pounds.
Offensive linemen are coming off the ball and hitting people pretty good. You're running from 6 yard out and he scores standing up. I think we're going to see a replay of this. Paul Blair on the film I watched earlier, Paul really mashes a guy right in here. Paul takes the guy and actually runs him back into the end zone. Offensive lineman came off the ball and played extremely well all day long.
Quite a bit of action before this night.
Good confrontation between Blair and Seawright right here, and Blair is winning it. Number 72 battling the All-American number 40.
Why he was so highly recruited.
Good look at the wall forming here in front of Thomas on one of the definitive I formation plays. Once again, it's Paul Blair, number 72, leading the way.
A lot, but it never ceases to amaze me, some of the awesome people who subscribe to the Dixie Heritage newsletter, and one of them is Paul Blair. He was the subject of the football highlights that you heard, and if you're on the internet, saw. And so Paul Blair is somebody who I actually met at a conference back, I want to say in February. It may have been March. I would have to look at my calendar to see that. But I was at the registration table there, and Paul came up at the same time that I did, and I saw him, and I thought, I know this guy, I know this guy, I know this guy. He's talking to me and my wife, and I'm like, I know this guy, I know this guy. And they hand him his name tag, Paul Blair, and I just asked him, I said, Paul, I said, did you play for the Chicago Bears? And he said, yes, I did. And it's like, that's why I recognize you. And of course, it had been several years. He played for the Bears, back in the 80s. And then he played for the Minnesota Vikings in the early 90s. And so, I was in high school and college at the time that he was playing. But that was also the best Chicago Bears team, maybe the best football team that ever existed in the history of the world. Of course, everybody remembers the 85 Bears, how they won the Super Bowl. And if you remember the Bears, and some of you aren't going to forgive me for this, but I'm going to say it anyways, the Bears probably had the absolute worst quarterback in the NFL at the time. I was not a Jim McMahon fan. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, he was the funky QB. As a high schooler, I kind of thought, okay, he was kind of trendy, whatever. But as an adult looking back on it, I'm like, as a football player, this guy just wasn't a very good quarterback. I'll say it. Jim McMahon made Colin Kaepernick look good. But anyways, be that as it may, Jim McMahon was not a very good quarterback. Colin Kaepernick's just that much worse. But anyways, the Bears didn't need offense. They had what was called the 46 defense. Buddy Ryan was their defensive coordinator, and Buddy Ryan developed what was called the 46 defense. And it just overwhelmed the other teams, so that Jim McMahon didn't have to move the ball. They didn't have to have a lot of offense because the other team never saw the ball. The other team never scored. And the result of that was they just overpowered all of their competitors. In fact, Mike Ditka, who was the head coach of the Bears at the time, he said that the 46 defense was such a new concept, he didn't even understand it. He just stood there on the sidelines and beheld it. And he said he was as impressed with it as the fans were. And Paul Blair, of course, was part of Buddy Ryan's defense, played that 46 defense. But now what he's done is he's moved on from football. He pastors one of the larger churches in Oklahoma, and he's done some interesting things. For example, every Sunday he has a Sunday that he calls his Defy the IRS Sunday, and he preaches a very political message, and he endorses political candidates in that sermon, and he sends a copy of it to the IRS, defying them to take some legal action against him. And he's been doing that for a number of years. And then also here recently, he had a Take Your Gun to Church Sunday. And so he had about 300 people who openly carried their sidearms, their pistols, or in some cases, people brought rifles and shotguns, but most people carried a sidearm. And he had the Bring Your Gun to Church Sunday in defense of the Second Amendment. And hundreds of people came to his church service, keeping and bearing arms. It was a tremendous service there at the church in Edmond, Oklahoma. And we had a piece about it. I'd written a blog piece about it. If you go to the TBR website, barnesreview.org, and look under the blog section, you go back a few blogs, and you'll see that I wrote a piece on Take Your Gun to Church Sunday, and that's the object or the subject of that blog piece. And so Paul has been politically active as a pastor, as a Christian, as a patriotic American for the last 15 years or so since leaving professional football. And we're going to talk about that, of course, later in the interview. But what Paul has done is he's taken that 46 defense, that overwhelming defense that we're just going to find the quarterback on the other side, and we are going to put every man on our defense against him. We're going to have 11 men going towards the quarterback, and one of us is going to get in, and one of us is going to sack him mentality. And he's adopted that to politics, and the results have just been amazing. In fact, I'm going to say that one of the reasons why there was such an overwhelming evangelical support for Donald Trump, and one of the reasons why Donald Trump was able to bulldoze his way through the 2016 election, was because he had guys like Paul Blair running that 46 defense and just breaking through the lines of the left. It was a sight to behold. Of course, it's recent history. We all know it. But Paul Blair is just an amazing guy, and I love him dearly. He and my wife and I, we got to eat dinner in Florida. He's coming back and forth from Oklahoma to Florida now, doing a lot of work here in Florida. We got to eat dinner with him recently, and he treated us to a delicious steak dinner. It was just a blessing to sit down and fellowship with him. Anyways, I've been trying to get him on the radio show. He's been saying, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. But he's just always busy. I can't seem to get him sat down long enough to do it. And so, anyways, long story short, I called him the other day. I said, can we get this done by the end of baseball season? And he's like, well, if you don't care where I'm at when I do the interview, he said, we can. And so anyways, long story short, he was in the car going to the airport, getting ready to get on a plane so that he can fly to a speaking engagement. And we got him here. We did some FaceTime. And so here's our interview with Paul Blair. Again, Paul Blair, pastor of Fairview Baptist Church in Edmonton, Oklahoma. He's planting Liberty Church in the Orlando, Florida area. He's a former player for Oklahoma State University, former football player for the Bears, and very active in the political arena as a pastor, as a conservative. He's a former candidate for the state house there in Oklahoma. He's ran twice, and he's also managed a couple of gubernatorial campaigns, the most recent being for Dan Fisher. Dan Fisher having run for governor of Oklahoma and had a very respectable showing in his primary. Didn't quite pull that out, however. He wasn't the establishment candidate. Anyways, here's our interview with Paul Blair.
Hey, Paul.
Ed,
Doing?
I've been doing well. Thank you for asking. Just tell you what, travel has gotten to be a bear anymore. It used to be that you missed a flight or had a bad connection or travel issues. It used to be the exception. Now that's become the rule. It seems to be just about every time I fly, there seems to be something somewhere. So anyway, but other than that, it's going well. By the way, I love your cap.
Oh, thank you. So since you love the cap, I'm going to ask you the question, especially if you watched last night's Brewers or Cubs game.
I
do you still think the Cubs can pull off first place, or do you think they're going to be stuck with the wild card?
No, I think we'll still win. I mean, we've got a game and a half lead and only 6 games to play. I mean, we would have to go. The Brewers would have to go like 5-1, and we'd have to go, 3-3. I really think that we'll hold on. But Tell you what, it's disgusting. We had bases loaded yesterday and couldn't get anybody home. We had 2 on and couldn't get anybody home.
Yeah.
So
Well, I hate to say this, but I gave up on the Cubs game pretty early, and I switched over to watching the Brewers game, hoping the Cards would beat the Brewers. So maybe I should have watched that Cubs game. But
yeah. Well, St. Louis is playing for their lives too. I mean, they certainly won
Yeah.
home field advantage in that playoff game. So I hope, as much as I hate pulling for the Cardinals, I hope that they can tag the Brewers with a loss or two this week.
Well, I honestly thought the Pirates would win at least one game in that series, but I didn't think it would be last night because yesterday was their travel day, and obviously the Cubs slept in their own bed last night the night before because they had played the White Sox on Sunday.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
So I was thinking that the Cubs would have come in ready to play, and the Pirates would have come in tired, but it didn't work out that way.
And you're freezing on me periodically. I've got a poor connection here. I'm not sure why. Let me tell you what. Let me drive about 2 miles. Service a little better, and let's try this again.
Okay.
That we're kind of early here to cut to a commercial, but obviously we're having some difficulties here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Paul go ahead and drive to a better location, a place where he thinks he can get a little bit better signal. And then we'll get him back on. In the meantime, we'll have our first commercial here for the Barnes Review, and then we'll be back with Paul Blair, and we're going to talk about life, we're going to talk about politics, we're going to talk about football, we're going to talk about the coup to overthrow President Trump, we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. But right now, here's a brief word from our sponsor, the Barnes Review magazine.
If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
He's the soul of the defense. He's always played with a great deal of heart. You know, he's a good athlete. He's got good size, but his greatest attribute is his heart and his mind.
Okay, good. Hey.
All right, this looks a little better. You're coming in loud and clear.
Yes, sir. So tell me, were you always a Cubs fan, or did you become one when you played in Chicago?
Oh, well, what was interesting is my aunt and uncle lived in Munster, Indiana, right by Hammond. In fact, my uncle and aunt were members of Jack Hyles Church, First Baptist of Hammond. So we would come up there and see them every summer. And, of course, the Cubs were always on the radio. So I always liked the Cubs and the Bears because of my connection with, just fond memories of that part of the world. Going up to see my aunt and uncle. And then, of course, when I went to Chicago, it just added to it. So
one of the beauties of the long form interview, which is kind of a lost art, that you get to take the long way to the destination. When you were in high school, if I remember your story right, you didn't play football, or did you?
Well, I did, but I was kind of a late bloomer. You know, I was almost an only child. And I have 2 brothers, and we're very, very close. But one brother is 14 years older than me, and the other brother is 10 years older than me. And my parents wound up having me. I was an accident, so my mom was about 40 and my dad was, roughly the same age. So they were at a different stage in life, a little bit more successful financially. And of course, 10 years separation between me and my brothers. I somewhat was like an only child, and they really protected me, sheltered me. So I grew up in a very, a strong, independent Baptist home. And, quite frankly, I don't know. I just really didn't develop athletically as kind of a late bloomer. So I went out and played football in junior high and high school. And I started in junior high. It wasn't like I was a terrible player, but just really didn't have a passion about it and didn't excel at it. and I really did it probably as much as anything because I thought Dad wanted me to play, and I didn't want to disappoint him. My senior year in high school, I wound up really. I was just kind of a late bloomer. I kind of grew, and I didn't start as a sophomore and didn't start as a junior. So I didn't start until my senior year in high school, which is odd for a guy that goes to play in the NFL. I wound up being a late bloomer, getting some interest from colleges, and I was one of those kids that they defined as having potential. I certainly wasn't a blue chip recruit, but you had a big frame, and they thought I might grow into my body. And a few colleges were interested in me. One was Oklahoma State, and that's where I wanted to go because my father had gone to Oklahoma. Well, it was Oklahoma A&M after World War II. So I grew up going to some games there and was a fan of OSU. And Jimmy Johnson was the head coach at that time. And they actually were trying to get me to walk on. But Tulsa had offered me a scholarship, and I was going to go there on scholarship before I went and walked on at OSU. And then at the last minute, last couple of days of signing period, OSU had somebody back out, and they offered me the scholarship. And I wound up making the varsity as a true freshman. In fact, I wound up, I just grew a bunch. I mean, I wound up growing about an inch after my senior year in high school and my freshman year in college, and I went from being about 225 to 255. So I mean, I literally went from being a big boy into a young man, and I wound up being probably the best recruit they had in that class.
And so, what happened then in college for you to end up being drafted by the Bears?
Well, it was interesting. It's a part of my testimony as well. Growing up from a very sheltered home, I wound up making the varsity as a true freshman, which back in 1981 didn't happen very often. Generally, you redshirted, and by your third or fourth year, you'd have a chance to play. But I made the varsity as a true freshman, and quite frankly, discovered girls and college life, and made some bad decisions. There's no excuses. But I was an 18-year-old all of a sudden, and my peer group was 21. And I allowed them to influence me, and so for the next 5 years, my 5 years in college and my first 3 years with Chicago, I continued to excel athletically, and I could talk Christianity. I mean, let's face it, I grew up in a solid home. My mom taught me books of the Bible, and I was memorizing Bible verses from heavens before I was born. I think she's probably making me memorize John 3:16 while I was still in the womb. But so I grew up with that kind of a background. But quite frankly, there was no evidence that Jesus was the Lord of my life. And I excelled collegiately. I was a 3-year starter. We were ranked as high as number 2 in the country at OSU. Played along some Hall of Fame guys. Thurman Thomas was one of my teammates at Oklahoma State. Leslie O'Neal was one of my teammates at Oklahoma State. And then I was drafted by Chicago after a very good college career. And but it's after my third year with the Bears, and after a couple of injuries. Unfortunately, I had an injury-plagued NFL career. But after my third year with Chicago, I was at home in the off season, and I was in church with out of respect for my dad, on a Sunday evening, and for some reason, just the Holy Spirit hit me and is like, Paul, you claim that Jesus is your Lord, but there's really no evidence that Jesus is the Lord of your life. So I walked the aisle as a that Sunday evening, probably 35 people in church, and I just gave my heart to Christ. I made sure that I was saved, and was baptized a week later, and been going 180 degrees ever since.
You said your football career was a lot of injuries.
Yep.
And I could be wrong, but if my memory serves, you played 3 years for the Bears or 4, and then you played 2 more for Minnesota?
Yeah, I played 3 years with Chicago. Then I went through Denver and wound up at Minnesota in 1989, and then had another season at Minnesota in 1990, and had another surgery about 13 games in that year, and that was the end of it. Just couldn't run anymore. I had a first knee injury when I was a freshman in college, and that I wound up getting a hardship ruling that year because I hadn't played. I'd only played in like 4 games, so I was able to get the year over again. But then had another knee injury my rookie year. I came back for the regular season, and then 87, my second year is pretty healthy, and I played a lot. Started a few games in 87, and then 88, I was as a preseason. I wound up messing up my right knee. Had ACL damage in my right knee, and cost me the better part of that year. So yeah, unfortunately, 5 years in the league altogether, but injury plagued. I was a lame horse. They wanted. It's kind of like Old Yeller. It's time to take him out back and put him down.
Okay. It wasn't your conversion that cut short your football career. In other words, did you?
No, I tried to play a couple more years, and because I got married, Cindy and I got married after that, and played 2 more seasons, collected some paychecks, but just never was able to get healthy and stay healthy after that. You know, I was somewhat, if I could pass a team's physical, I was valuable commodity because I had experience, and I wasn't high priced labor because of my injuries. But
Right.
the problem was is a lot of teams I couldn't pass their physicals. You know, I remember flying around the country and going to Kansas City and Washington Redskins and Buffalo and San Diego and
Mhm.
Houston. And I went in and worked out for a number of teams. They liked what I could do on the field, but once I went to see the doctor, it was like, nope, we can't use you, buddy.
This is an unfair question, probably, but I'm going to ask it. A son of a preacher.
Yeah.
Plays college football, plays in the NFL. How did you not become Tebow?
How did I not become Tebow?
Yeah.
Well,
or was Tebow trying to be you?
Well, I wasn't living for the Lord, Ed. I mean, like I said, when I was in Chicago, my first 3 years with the Bears, and then when I was at Oklahoma State, I wasn't living for the Lord. I would have called myself a Christian, and I made a profession of faith when I was 6. I may have been. You know, I was a good kid. I really didn't give my parents any problems. I was a pretty good kid throughout junior high and high school. But like I said, I was an 18-year-old kid, and I go to Oklahoma State, and I discover girls and bars and other things, and quite frankly, there was about, like I said, there's about 8 years of my life where I would have called myself a Christian because I believe in the security of the believer. But, there was really very little evidence that Jesus was the Lord of my life. So in '89, after that third year, I made sure that I was saved.
So you got married before or after that?
Right after that, about 6 months after that.
So did you meet your wife in church or did you meet her in one of the bars?
I met her at Oklahoma State. My wife was a good gal. She came from a Methodist family, and she was different. I mean, she was just. It was really an odd relationship because we kind of had eyes on each other early on, but I knew that she was not your typical girl, and there was something special about her. And first time we went out on a date, I couldn't even, I didn't even attempt to kiss her. I mean, there was just something different about Cindy. And so we kind of went out a little bit, and then didn't see each other for several months, and because I just wasn't ready to settle down, and I knew that she was the kind of girl I wanted to settle down with. She knew my family background, and she believed that there was something worth waiting on for me. But and eventually it worked out. Eventually the Lord got my attention. Eventually I got my life right, and we've been married now for 29 years, and we got 2 great kids, and she's just a dynamite lady.
Well, I remember you told me one time, one of the things we have in common, you said your wife was your best friend and your golfing partner.
Absolutely.
I only make it out to the golf course about 8 or 9 times a year.
Oh.
But I would say probably at least 6 or 7 of those times my golf partner will be my wife. So.
Well, Cindy and I, she's my best friend. She's everything. God really blessed me. She's been a great mom and a great wife. And she's so supportive. We're on all these things we're doing, going back and forth to Florida now. The work we're getting ready to try to get stirred up down there. She travels with me everywhere, and it just it makes it easier on me when I'm not away from her.
I'm looking at football.
Yeah.
And this is an unusual year for me because usually I really don't start looking at football until the Cubs are out of contention, which meant in 2016, it was the middle of November before I even looked at football.
Gotcha.
This is an unusual year. Well, I'll tell you the story. I played football in junior high school. I played football, basketball, baseball in junior high school. In high school, I was on the bowling team, the golf team, and the basketball team, and the baseball team. I didn't play football in high school. In junior high school, played football. My 8th grade year, I was a defensive lineman, and I don't know what happened my 8th grade year. I felt a football hit my chest. I lifted up from a block, and I felt football hit my chest. I just instinctively clutched the thing and ran 30 yards for a touchdown. And when I got back to the bench, I got the coach's cowboy boot in my backside. His thinking was I should have just dropped on that ball and let the offense do its work. I'm like, coach, I scored a touchdown. He's like, yeah. He's like, you could have fumbled it. He's like, telling me all the things I could have done wrong.
Right.
And so, the long story short is I kind of decided right there, especially since the practicing for the other sports wasn't nearly as intense, that football was a lot of work for no glory.
Yeah.
In baseball, I could do less work and even a base hit, I would get something out of that. I could drop a bunt and get get a little bit of glory out of that if I got an RBI out of it. But, you can sacrifice in baseball. You can't really do that in football. So, I didn't play football in high school, but I love football. And then I went to college. And you talked about Jack Hiles. I was a freshman at Howes Anderson that year. And the Bears fired Ditka.
Oh, yeah. It was about 91, wasn't it? 92.
Yeah. And I just lost interest in football for about 10 years. I don't know why. I remember watching that press conference, and about 10 years later, I turned on another football game. But the Bears right now, the Bears are playing top of their division. I know they're only 3 games into the season, but do you think that the Bears, this is going to be their year? Or?
I really am encouraged. And again, my oldest son is in 3rd year of law school, and he is just a huge Chicago fan because of his dad's connection there.
Mm-hmm.
John's going to go up and watch the Tampa Bay game this weekend. I got him some tickets to that, and he's going to catch the Cubs while he's in town. But we are definitely all very high on the Bears this year. I love their ground game. I think they've got a good offensive line. Howard's a solid running back. Trubisky, he is just a gamer. He reminds me a lot of Jimmy Mack because he's just a competitor. I really like the kid. And then, of course, their defense is phenomenal. It looks like an all SEC defensive front.
Mm-hmm.
And then adding Khalil Mack, I mean, he's just the icing on the cake. I really think they're going to be competitive this year. I'm excited. And, I think the next time they play Green Bay, they're going to beat the dog out of them and get back for that debacle on week 1. But I'm excited about the Bears. Absolutely.
Have you ever preached in Wisconsin during football season?
Did I ever what now in Wisconsin? Play?
Preach in Wisconsin during football season.
I don't think so. I can't remember. I don't think so.
This was probably 15 years ago, maybe longer now. I was preaching up in Oshkosh at Dr. Randy King's church.
Yeah.
And normally when I would preach there would be, 2,000-3,000 people.
Yeah.
There in the auditorium. And I come in there one Sunday morning, and there might have been 300 people in that 4,000 seat auditorium. And I asked him, I said, "What happened, Dr. King?" I said, "Did you have a church split? Did something happen?" He goes, "No, the Packers are playing."
Yeah. That's a religion.
Yeah.
Well, they've had too much good favor. I mean, to follow up a Hall of Fame quarterback in Brett Favre with the guy they got up there right now, holy smokes! I mean, they've had 2 decades of MVP play at quarterback position. They're definitely due for a drought, and the Bears are due for an uptick. So hopefully we'll have a decade to celebrate.
Yeah, I know that you're very politically active. In fact, you ran for the State House in Oklahoma this year.
State Senate a couple of years ago. That's correct. Huh?
Okay. For some reason, I was thinking that was this past cycle that you ran. But no, that was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I actually ran in 2012 against an incumbent, and then ran again in 2016.
Okay. And I know you were also very active in Dan Fisher's gubernatorial campaign.
Right.
I know you've been very active in getting some legislation passed there in Oklahoma and nationally as well. But I'm going to guess you were not politically active when you played football?
No, not so much. I mean, obviously, I grew up a conservative. I mean, my parents were, Republican from the early days and voted always, we've always considered pro-life and pro-family. And so, I had those leanings, and I've always registered as a Republican. For my very first time I voted was for Ronald Reagan. So that's my age bracket. So I was always conservative, but never terribly politically active. Really, not until I was a preacher, really about 2004.
Right.
That I started becoming very politically engaged.
And again, my observation is because the time you were playing for the Bears, I was in high school, and I was in college when you were playing in Minnesota. And so my observation of the game would have been different at that age of my life than it would be now. But I'm going to guess the time you were playing, most of the players probably were not political. Or am I incorrect about that?
No, I think you're probably right. I think very few were. Of course, in the 80s, we weren't at war anywhere. And the economy was really good with Reaganomics and everything was going on. It was really a good time to be an American. So, there really wasn't a lot of unrest or rioting. I mean, we had zero racial tension on our team that I was aware of. I mean, in college and the NFL, both. I mean, it was really a good time to be alive. It's a good time to be an American. You didn't have the insanity of this insane transgender nonsense, and all that craziness. I guess there weren't really a lot of guys that were terribly politically active at that time.
Right. Often made this a controversial conversation. Of course, that's what he does. That's what all good political activists and all good preachers and proclaimers of truth do. Those who confront things in our culture that need to be confronted. So what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of this as a good spot to pause. And we're going to have a commercial from one of our sponsors, the American Free Press. But before we have that commercial, we're going to have some video footage that we're going to play here. And it's Paul Blair addressing the City Council of Oklahoma recently. And specifically, they were looking at passing some city ordinances that would have given special privileges and status, if you will, under city law to transgenders particularly. And Dr. Blair went and he spoke to the city council and he addressed that subject. And so we're going to stick that video footage in there just a couple of minutes. You're going to get to see that. And then we'll have our commercial from the American Free Press, and then we'll continue our interview with Paul.
Paul, I will need your name and address for the record, please.
Paul Blair. I'm a citizen of the greater Oklahoma City area community. I live in Edmond, 4325 The Ranch Road. I'm pastor of Fairview Baptist Church. First of all, it was interesting hearing Ed Shadid's exposition of the Bible. I wish I had time. I would like to be able to respond to that, but because of 3 minutes, I don't have the time. Mr. White, I appreciate your opinions. If you are that offended by citizens of other communities coming to Oklahoma City, then we can certainly shop in our own communities as well. However, your decisions in the greater Oklahoma City area will affect all of us. Number 3, regarding social services, the Bible very clearly outlines the particular realms of charity. If I give my money away, it's charity. If the church gives money away, it's charity. When the federal government, state government, or city government takes my tax dollars and redistributes them, that is not charity. That's not a realm of their responsibility, according to the Bible. But that just being said in passing. 3 things briefly about this particular issue. Number 1, it's unnecessary. As was noted, there's only been one alleged case of discrimination within the last 12 years. We don't have a major problem here. Number 2, why are we creating a special class of protection for someone's behavior? We're not talking about civil rights. This is not a gender, or this is not a race. This is protecting someone's behavior. In all studies, whether Kinsey's, whether Masters and Johnson's, say that homosexuality is largely a learned behavior. Number 3, don't forget the T in GLBT. The GLBT community, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender, act as one. The transgender, what are you going to do when you pass these kind of policies? Mouth's dry. And all of a sudden, you've got Jim in accounting that decides he wishes to wear a miniskirt to work one day. Well, are you going to discriminate against him and send him home? What are you going to do when Officer Jones decides that he wishes to take a shower in the women's locker room because he's feeling like a woman that day? And by the way, what about the rights of that Christian woman, or even the Muslim police officer, as I see Muslim community represented in the chambers this afternoon or this morning? What about that woman's rights when she has to go to the shower and find some hairy-legged man in there wishing to shower with you or with her, and you all will not run the risk of discriminating against his civil rights, supposedly? Anyway, that's all I had to share. I hope that you'll consider those things as have far-reaching consequences. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States, the things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative, independent news source for honest, hardworking, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed by the big money controlled media monopoly. And that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net.
And what this Bear defense is doing to him is just getting him in the pits and just boom, just pushing him right back into white. Watch it right here in the middle where it collapses on him. You see right here, they're getting the push. Now watch, the whole thing collapses right there around the quarterback. And there's all those packed jerseys diving in on there.
And the reason I ask that is because you look at the NFL now, and all you see is political activism. Of course, Colin Kaepernick seems to get the lion's share of the publicity on that.
And what's so bad, Ed, is that it's misguided. I mean, these guys are all operating on a false premise. I mean, this Kaepernick, the guy is a nut. I don't know why he's so bitter. I mean, his father abandoned him. His mom chose not to abort him. And then he was adopted by a Christian couple and raised and loved, had a successful college career, goes to play in the NFL, playing in the Super Bowl. For crying out loud, it's not exactly like the world has been unfair to him. He's been very fortunate. And then this whole deal, all of a sudden, a few years ago, when he loses his starting position, that's what's funny. He wasn't politically active until he gotten benched. And then now that he was Mr. Irrelevant, he decides he's going to not stand for the national anthem because America is just not fair. And he's basing it on this. By the way, he's a guy that's making $15-20 million a year, and America's not fair.
Right.
And he throws out this premise that we've got out of control gangs of police officers roaming the streets looking for innocent minorities to torture and kill. Well, that's just not true. None of that's true. But they keep repeating this message out there. And so the whole argument is based on a false narrative. And that's what's really sad about it. I mean, if he was actually standing up for something that was legitimate, that was really existing, that'd be one thing. But are there bad cops out there? Sure there are. There's bad everybody out there. But I imagine that the percentage of bad cops is minuscule. And the reality is that are there accidental shootings and things? Absolutely there are. But when you're a police officer, your goal is to enforce the law and to go home at night alive to your family. These guys don't have the benefit of instant replay, and they're having to make life and death decisions literally in an instant. And sometimes they make the wrong one. So that's the reality of the world that we live in. But this whole idea that there are just police officers out here intentionally targeting innocent minorities is just not true.
And obviously, I would agree with you that Kaepernick's choice of causes is poor. Just to put it politely, I don't agree with him at all. I would agree with you on that. Then of course there's another way to deal with it. Robert Kraft told all of his players, he said, if you really believe that strongly about something, he said, do it during the off season. He said, do it in our own community. He said, tell me what you're doing and I'll match you dollar for dollar on it.
Right.
Nobody really took him up on the offer.
Right.
So obviously, there was nothing that they were that passionate about.
Reality
do you think that these players should use the game as a platform, regardless of their positions, left or right or whatever? Or do you think that the game should just sort of be left apolitical and maybe if they want to use their recognition as a player off the field somewhere to be active,
No, that's correct. Because they've got, they talk about First Amendment rights. Yeah, we've got a First Amendment right of free speech. But, when you are working for your employer has a right to have you represent him. So when you are on the job, you don't have the right to do whatever you want to do. You have an obligation to your employer. So, what these guys have done is incorrect, and the NFL has allowed itself to be misused, and it is a shame. You've got Republicans and Democrats that play pro football and basketball and everything else. So, if these guys want to do something for a cause outside the game, outside the 3 hours of airtime of a game, then that more power to them. But when it comes to football, I think most people just want to enjoy the sport.
Mm-hmm. I think it might be an outgrowth of this, and I'm sure you probably know more about it than I do. The NFL's ratings have gone down enough. Ticket sales have gone down enough. I guess there have been a few people who have got together, some money people, that they've started what's called the Alliance of American Football. Have you heard about that? The Alliance Football League. And
no, I haven't.
Okay, they're going to have their first game is going to be in February. Yeah, in February. It's going to be, I believe, either the Saturday after or 2 Saturdays after the Super Bowl. The NFL has actually agreed to let them have a 5-minute commercial during the Super Bowl to promote their new league. Of course, they've spent a lot of money for that consideration. Spurrier is going to be coaching the Orlando team, and I want to say in Memphis is the team where your former teammate Mike Singletary is going to be the head coach.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. No, I hadn't heard anything about that. I think that's wonderful. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, they're going to play on Saturdays so that people don't miss church.
And is it a pro league? It's
a professional league. They are going to play, I think they've got 8 teams right now in the league. They're going to play on Saturdays. They're going to play a spring schedule so that they don't conflict with the NFL. They've got ticket packages where the most expensive tickets in these stadiums are like $50. Most of the tickets are around $20. So it's definitely going to be a more affordable fan experience. And they even have a television contract. CBS is going to carry the first 2 weeks of games, and then depending on the ratings, they're either going to continue to broadcast them, or if not, they're going to live stream them on the CBS app. But either way, they've got a television contract.
Good.
So,
good. Well, I hope they're successful. Need more competition out there. I think that's wonderful. I was alive when the USFL was in existence, and unfortunately, it started to die about the time I came out of college. But that was good for let's face it, free market competition is good for everybody. Provides a better product at a better price, more employment opportunities. So I love the idea of having more opportunities for young men coming out and playing football.
So the USFL, some of the same people are kind of behind this.
Good.
Let me push this out a little bit. Obviously, we know, what motivated you. Probably, I'm going to guess, not entirely. You haven't told the whole story, but you told about how the Lord got a hold of you, and that moved you obviously from football towards the ministry. But what was your motivation to become active in the political arena? Because so many pastors fear that area.
Well, quite frankly, Ed, one of the things that concerned me was just the moral condition of our country. And I happen to be, a dispensationalist. I'm a pre-trib guy. I look for the rapture. However, I don't know when the Lord's going to come. I don't know if he's going to come in 5 years or 15 years or 20 years. And what concerns me is if the Lord tarries. If the Lord comes today, praise God. I am as active and engaging, trying to spread the gospel as any pastor that's out there. We're very active on the college campuses. We're very active in our evangelism ministries and things of that nature. But there's a couple of things that are wrong with the way we've approached Christianity. Number one, the new birth is just the beginning of life. We are supposed to be disciples. We're supposed to glorify God in everything that we do. Paul said from the very Jewish perspective, whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. Well, we don't do a very good job of making Jesus the Lord of every facet of our lives. Pastors have been selective on what they'll preach about and what they don't preach about. And quite frankly, we've become ignorant on areas that we consider controversial. And that's wrong. We should be leading on a biblical worldview, whether it be pertaining to the family or whether it be pertaining to political issues or anything else. Quite frankly, Christians should set the bar when it comes to honesty and integrity in the workforce. We should be the best people to work for, and we should be the first people that others want to hire. But we basically have compartmentalized our lives. We have our Christian things that we can talk about on Sunday morning, and then we have everything else, the rest of our lives, that we put in what we call our secular box. Well, that's non-biblical. Jesus isn't the Lord of your life if that's the case, because Jesus is supposed to be the Lord of everything. But the other thing, as I said, as far as getting involved in politics, you can look at how we're in a moral free fall now. We've had the Supreme Court illegally declare, that marriage means anything you want to call it. And what concerns me is what my kids will be raising my grandkids in if the Lord doesn't come first. And we certainly are in a decline. I don't want my children to ever be persecuted for their faith, if possible. I don't want my grandchildren to be intimidated and bullied and persecuted for their faith. So that's one of the main reasons that I decided to get active. It's up to us. It's up to Christians. We're supposed to be salt and light, illuminating a dark world and fighting decay and corruption. And we really haven't done a good job. For the most part, the church has abandoned the culture rather than engaging the culture. And that's absolutely wrong. You look at every revival that ever broke out in history, whether it be the revival in Ephesus or the revival in Thessalonica, or the revival of the 1700s with Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield. When people came to Christ, it radically transformed the culture. Well, we have become we talk one thing on Sunday mornings, but we don't practice it the rest of our week. And that's a form of Christianity that's foreign to the Bible. So I'm very engaged in trying to see truth promoted in our culture. Jesus is the Lord of every facet of my life. He is not excluded from my social life or my political life. Jesus is my Lord. And quite frankly, pastors need to understand that and start preaching and teaching the same thing.
Right. Well, I'm going to throw one more out there. I know you texted me that you got to go here in a minute, so I'm going to throw one more question out there. 4 ranking Democrats just signed a letter basically ordering people in the Justice Department to ignore direct orders from the President of the United States. Maybe I'm wrong. That looks a lot like documentable treason to me.
Yeah.
There is a coup going on in our own government. What do you think about that?
No, I would agree with you. And part of that, goes back to our basic misunderstanding. Christians have been ignorant. We don't understand how the law is not being enforced right now. Ed, we talk about being self-governed. Our self-government has been orchestrated through the fact that we have pledged to be governed by a rule of law. We aren't governed by an imperial president. We aren't governed by a Supreme Court. We have agreed to be governed by the rule of law, and we are no longer following our Constitution even close. But the average Christian doesn't recognize just how treasonous all of this is that's going on, because we've been, politically illiterate. Rather than being the sons of Issachar that had understanding of the times and was able to stand up and influence the people to do right, we have just abandoned this engagement altogether because, quite frankly, most Christians, as I said a while ago, they have either by default or by choice have just been ignorant when it comes to these issues. And literally, our future is in peril. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing, and we're focusing on the I-4 corridor. We hope to come down there and to be able to help you guys and teach biblical worldview to pastors and to Christians, so that we as professing Christians will actually be practicing Christians, where Jesus is the Lord of every facet of our lives, including how we look at politics and civil government.
So is there anything else you want to throw out there before you take off on us? Or
No, buddy, I look forward to getting down there and getting to work with you guys. I'm down there every other weekend right now. We started a church plant in Maitland called Liberty Church, and I'll be speaking. We're on the radio now on Salem Radio at 9:50 a.m. every day at 2 o'clock in the Orlando area. And I'm going to be speaking at a couple of the Salem Radio pastors' luncheons, and we're going to be trying to get as many boot camps as we can scheduled for after the first of the year. I've got to, you talked about not playing football. You made a good choice, Ed. I've had one knee replaced. I need the other one replaced. I've got to have both shoulders done before the end of the year. And my back's a mess, and my biceps are, everything that's on me is broken, let me tell you. So I've got to work around a couple of surgeries, but I'm looking forward to getting down there and getting going on some of these camps, because I-4 is critical. You know, literally, if you think about it, if there is a area of the country that could change the direction of the entire country, it's Interstate 4. Because, you know, as we've seen in these presidential elections, how Florida votes dictates whether the White House is conservative or liberal, or so-called conservative or liberal. And of course, you know, the state of Florida is largely liberal to the south and conservative to the north. So how I-4 votes is determines the direction of the entire country. But the reality is, and this is what we've got to get back to, that we haven't done a good job of. There's no such thing as black truth and white truth and male truth and female truth. There's just truth. And if we get in the Bible, it's not that complicated. You know, the Bible absolutely dictates that we protect life, that we cherish life. The Bible dictates that we cherish and protect the definition of the family and the importance of of family government. The Bible also is very restrictive on what the civil government is supposed to be doing and not doing. The Bible is also a document that promotes free market economics and not totalitarian Marxist systems. If we would actually get into the Bible and see what the Bible teaches us, it would really make a difference in every area of our life. And we would see a great time of prosperity. Plus, we'd see a phenomenal spiritual revival. So I'm hoping that we can have some success when we come down there and actually just get in the scripture and start seeing how the Bible instructs us in every facet of life.
I know the founding fathers had that same discovery. Yep. Obviously, if you look at the Great Awakening preceded the Revolution, and I honestly believe that the Revolution was the outgrowth of the Great Awakening.
Absolutely. In fact, King George initially called it the Presbyterian Rebellion, because they just considered this an uprising of colonial pastors. And if it wasn't for the Great Awakening, you're exactly right, Ed, we wouldn't have the country, we wouldn't have enjoyed the civil and religious liberty that we have enjoyed as Christians for the last 200 plus years. That's the things that we don't recognize. In America, we just assume that Christianity has always been tolerated and always been free. Well, we know that that's not true. You look at 2,000 years of Christian history. Christians have always been persecuted. Even around the world today, in communist countries and Muslim countries, Christians have always been persecuted. Only in America, and only for the last 250 years, have we been able to preach and teach and enjoy and live life the way we do without persecution or prosecution. And we don't realize that there are those that want to take that away from us.
Well, I have an article, and I'll email it to you after we get off here. I'm going to put it in my newsletter this week. The gist of it is basically that religious liberty didn't take foot in this country till about the 1830s. Even though the First Amendment had been passed several years before that, it took about 40 years or so to get all the states to go along with it. And that now we're kind of going back to that persecution. Mm-hmm. You know, we've kind of, the pendulum swung back the other way now. And we're starting to see a lot of persecution of Christians again, and other religions here in this country, but mainly of Christians.
Right.
And it also kind of had some of Judge Kavanaugh's voting record on religious issues. And basically showing how if either he or someone like him does not get on the court to be that determining fifth vote, that this country is probably going to be postured to go into a wave of religious persecution. And right. It won't be the land of religious freedom anymore.
Well, we've seen that. I mean, you see this Baronelle Stutzman up in Washington State. This is a godly grandmother, a florist. She hasn't ever discriminated against anybody. She has employed homosexuals. She's done business with homosexuals. But then after the Obergefell decision, a homosexual couple came in, wanted her to do their wedding cake, and she said, I am a Christian. I believe that marriage, according to the Bible, is between a man and a woman. I cannot participate in that. Now she's facing some $2 million in fines and penalties. That is persecution. We see photographers, bakers, also florists, and others. But we're seeing persecution beginning with Christians. And persecution doesn't just mean be executed. I mean, if all of a sudden you're faced with $2 million in fines, that's persecution.
Yeah. Well, the cake baker in Colorado, I wrote an article in American Free Press a few weeks ago that he's facing another prosecution by the state of Colorado. Mm-hmm. And the day he got his Supreme Court decision, they already had another customer coming into his cake shop trying to set him up for the next attack. Yeah. And I'm thinking, did they not just read the Supreme Court decision?
Yeah. And see, that's the thing, Ed. You got to be honest and look at these things. They aren't going after, you talked about persecution of other religions. Other religions aren't being persecuted. They're not trying to set up Muslim delicatessen owners or bakers, because Muslims don't adhere to this idea of same-sex marriage either. But they're not targeting them. They're just coming after Christians. The truth is what is let's face it. The truth is what's being targeted. And Christianity is the truth. Jesus is the truth. And we are seeing persecution beginning on Christians. So if we don't awaken as pastors right now and start standing up and proclaiming truth in the marketplace and in the town square, our children will in fact, we will probably suffer for it. So,
So tell us, what is your website? How do people find out more about you?
Oh, I tell you what, I've got a number of websites out there, Ed. You can go to reclaimingamericaforchrist.org, ra4c.org. You can go to paulkblair.com. Really is probably a good place to launch. I think you can get to my church website. Of course, we got Liberty Church in Orlando. We've got Fairview Baptist Church in Edmond, Oklahoma. So paulkblair.com or reclaimingamericaforchrist.org are probably the two easiest places to go to get started.
Okay, well, I appreciate you taking a few moments with us today, Paul, and maybe we'll do it again sometime, hopefully.
Ed, be glad to. Anytime I can help, just let me know.
Okay, well, God bless you, brother.
God bless you too, buddy. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Bye. With Paul Blair. I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. And the spectrum. We talked sports, we talked politics, we talked the Christian faith, we talked history, we talked religious persecution, we talked political activism. I know we covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, but it was just a great conversation, and I appreciate Paul being our guest today. We'd like to encourage you to go to Paul's website, paulkblair.com. We've had that up on the screen there for you. And there's some great articles there that Paul has written through the years. He gives his testimony, and he talks a lot in that about his football days and then transitioning from football to pastoring and politics. And so there's a lot of good stuff up on that website. And I would also like to encourage you to go to my website, www.dixieheritage.net, www.dixieheritage.net. And when you give us your email address, I will sign you up for a free copy of a book that Paul read. And it's called The Truth About the American Battle Flag. I remember some time ago now, I remember mailing Paul a copy, actual paper copy of it. And he read that in my book on marriage, divorce, and remarriage. What does the Bible teach? And he's like, wow, man, thank you for writing these books. Thank you for putting all the research into it. And so this really is a powerful book that we want to give you a free copy of. And all you have to do is give us your email address, no cost, no obligation, no credit card number, no postal address. We'll send you a PDF file of a best-selling book. And we'll also sign you up for our weekly newsletter, the Dixie Heritage Letter. Of course, when you go to dixieheritage.net, you can look up back copies of the newsletter on there as well, and you can read them. So I hope that you will do that. Of course, for all of us here at TBR Radio presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, it is our weekly blessing and our weekly privilege to be able to bring these shows to you. And so I hope that whatever venue you're listening to right now, that you'll come back same time, same place next week, and we'll be back with yet another episode. Until then, from all of us here at TBR Radio presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, may God bless you. Go Bears and go Cubs.